Judges chapters 3 to 5 today, and this very much continues the theme from the first two chapters, where it very much gives the game away, saying that basically what these judges are people who will rise up out of the population to lead the Israelites after they get oppressed by other people because they're being naughty. There's an odd little extra bit in this one, because it mentions that the Israelites are only being tested against these other people attacking them for the Israelites who haven't seen battle during the Joshua bit. So it is just to give them some experience of battle. Why? That seems like a new idea that's come out of nowhere, that suddenly everybody needs to be battle hardened, and otherwise there's something not quite complete. And it seems to conflict with the idea that they're being attacked because they're not doing as they're told. It mentions again, though, that the Israelites are intermingling with the Canaanites, so the Canaanites who they're supposedly accused of genociding and clearly didn't. And they're intermarrying with them even, so it's not even like they're mortal enemies in a lot of ways. In some ways, clearly, it's a bit of a weird relationship, it seems. And then the Israelites are serving the gods of the Canaanites, this Baal chap and all the rest of it. So it does seem that it's a theme or a pattern of centuries of warfare between all these different tribes, for want of a better word. So they're intermarrying with the Canaanites, and they're falling out with the Canaanites, then they're ruling the Canaanites, and the Canaanites are ruling them. And yeah, no one, it seems, is getting wiped out. There are more references to Baal, and again the Bible uses the phrase the Baals to refer to them, which just makes me giggle and think of Ron Burgundy. So that's clearly not what that's supposed to be all about, but I defy anyone not to giggle a little bit when someone calls a god the Baals. So from there we add in some more detail about who's oppressing the Israelites and who rises up as the judge. We start off with a king of someone called the Aram Naraim, and they oppress the Israelites for 8 years, seemingly as a result of the Israelites sinning and following these other gods. And so for 8 years they're oppressing the Israelites. It's not clear to what extent this oppression is happening, but certainly that these people are ruling over the Israelites. At that point, the first judge then arrives, who isn't Sylvester Stallone. It turns out, in fact, it is the younger brother of Caleb. This guy, Othniel, rises up, leads the Israelites out of captivity from Naraim, and then they have peace for 40 years before Othniel dies. Anyway, after Othniel dies, God then delivers the Israelites into the hands of the Moabites because they go back to all their sinning and all the rest of it. So the Moabites then oppress them for 18 years. The next judge then arises, a chap called Ehud, something like that, Ehud. And he tricks the king of the Moabites into being alone with him, and then he's got a sword hidden that no one seems to have noticed or checked for. He's just the leader of the baddies as far as the Moabites are concerned. And you've just let him in with a sword, whacking great sword hidden up his skirt, whatever. Anyway, so he tricks this king of the Moabites into being alone with him and then runs him through with his sword. There's some odd detail in this, actually, because it notes that the king of the Moabites was a very fat man and the sword disappears into the fat folds. Bit weird. And it even goes as far as to note that the king's bowels discharged themselves. Yeah. The Bible does seem to have this thing about weird, just slightly extraneous and not particularly pleasant detail, like Joshua putting people on spikes. And that sort of implies there's an obvious mechanism by which you could insert a spike to put someone on a pole. And this, I mean, it's very clear in the story, this guy is dead. There's no question of that at all. But it just adds in, by the way, he crapped himself in the process. So, don't know, but maybe it's important. Anyway, the Israelites then kill 10,000 Moabites. I don't quite understand why killing the king suddenly means that suddenly it's easy to kill 10,000 other people. It's so nothing magical, maybe some disorganisation, but whatever, that's what happens. And then the Israelites rule over the Moabites for the next 80 years. This is definitely tying back to what seemed to be the case in the first two chapters, saying that this is clearly written a long way after the event. I mean, we've already covered several hundred years. So somewhat slam dunks that. This is clearly an account written much later, like hundreds of years later. So the pattern then continues. We have the Israelites ruling over the Moabites for 80 years, then they go back to their sinning after Ehud dies. The Canaanites then come along and oppress the Israelites for another 20 years. They've been oppressed for 8 years, then 18 years, then 20 years, in between quite long periods of them ruling the others. But then we have some actual ladies coming into the mix doing actual stuff other than just bearing children. So we have a prophet who is Deborah. She leads the Israelites at this point and then leads the next uprising to free themselves from the Canaanites. And she has a friend called Jael, Jael, who kills the commander of the baddies army using a tent peg and a hammer. Yeah. Clearly not ladies to be messed with anyway. And then we have peace for another 40 years. It is interesting, this genocide question, in the sense that if anyone raises the objection to all this, that the Israelites were committing genocide, it's like, no, they weren't, were they? They went backwards and forwards fighting with the Canaanites and intermarrying with them for centuries. So it definitely wasn't march out of Egypt, walk up to Promised Land, kill everybody there and nick their land. It's just not what happened. So, yeah, I don't quite know where that question mark comes from. It's interesting as well that the Israelites get oppressed for a while, and then this judge rises up to liberate them. And it seems that this is happening because God takes pity on the Israelites. This is despite no matter what he does. I mean, all through Exodus, the whole story was them being naughty and just not doing as they're told and not following simple instructions, and God giving them some sort of lifeline. And they're doing it here. They rise up, they're liberated, they're told, just hang out, be grooving, all will be fine. Then the judge dies, they go back to following Baal and doing whatever naughty things they were doing, and they get oppressed again. And it's absolutely nuts. I can't work out if it is supposed to be a metaphor and it's not a true story, or if it is a true story and it's just reflecting to a dramatic extent, I guess, what probably does happen in real life. People try and do the right thing and they find themselves veering off and doing something else. Even if it's something like, you should mow the lawn, but you go and watch Netflix or something. And granted, this Israelite business is happening on a much grander scale, much more dramatic scale, but it is still the same idea, isn't it? So I think perhaps it doesn't matter whether it's metaphorical or literal in that sense. Either way, it is a magnified echoing of certain problems, I suppose. And I guess it's interesting in that respect. It's also nice to see some ladies actually doing something and not just being in the Bible for having children. I mean, it still identifies them by reference to their husbands. So despite this Deborah being the leader of Israel at this point, she still identifies Deborah's wife of something weird and long. Not going to bother. But it's perhaps progress at least, and that's coming from someone, I'm not feminist or anything like that. It just seems unlikely that no women are doing anything beyond really old-fashioned stereotypical type stuff. But yeah, so we'll move on and see what comes next. Presumably more of this in terms of judges arising to liberate the Israelites after their sinning. We'll see if there's any more of these really weird little details that the Bible seems to like putting in about people soiling themselves or whatever.